Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, October 15th, 2018. I am SuperDerek, and it is time for your regularly scheduled JRPG weekly update. Starting with a little bit of news coming from Konami. It may or may not be actual news, but, well, let's see what you guys think. If you haven't already heard, Konami, after about 4 years of letting their Genso Suikoden website stagnate, has finally decided to redesign and relaunch the Suikoden webpage, which is kind of unusual because we haven't heard of any actual news coming from Suikoden for quite some time, not since their PSP release. We haven't heard much from them since then, and well, it looks like there's some sort of sign of life coming from them. Maybe they just realized, oh, our website's really out of date or something. I don't know. But what I do know is that web design, no matter how trivial, there's definitely going to be dollar signs attached to this. Konami has definitely spent some money, and maybe that was just hiring somebody internally to spend some time making this. But even still, there's dollar signs attached to that, and money in big corporations does not move without signatures from higher people. So it was definitely some sort of calculated decision by Konami to update this. Now, whether or not that actually means anything to us yet is yet to be seen, and what that will mean is yet to be seen. After 4 years of complete inactivity, the whole thing has been revamped. Also, I believe recently Genso Suikoden 1 and 2 were free on the PlayStation Network in Japan. So it could be that Konami is starting to revive the franchise, and I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. It could just be a Suikoden pachinko machine for all we know. And honestly, let's be honest, that's kind of likely. And in the state that Konami is in right now, here's another question for you guys, and I'd like to hear your answers on this. Is Konami currently fit to work on the Suikoden series, or should they instead hand this off to another development team? Because I know a lot of people aren't very fond of Konami at the moment because of a lot of just bad business practices and being a terrible company in general for the last few years. I don't know about you guys, but I would personally feel really conflicted about playing a game from Konami at this point. Not only do I feel like they lack the ability to make a truly great RPG at this point, but also just the human conditions that they put their employees through. I don't know if there's been any sort of reform, but we all know what happened with Kojima, and I would honestly much prefer they hand this over to pretty much anybody else, Atlas or Sega, or just somebody who already is in the world of making RPGs good and treating their employees well. The producer behind Dragon Quest, Miyake, has recently been talking a little bit about Dragon Quest and the West, and the seemingly jump a lot of our fans took from Dragon Quest VIII to 11, apparently skipping a lot of the DS and 3DS titles that were available. And he talks about the relative unpopularity and they're choosing to, not bring Dragon Quest X, the MMO, over to the States. It sounds like he's actually considering trying to bring a version of that to us over here. What's interesting about it is that not just that he's talking about bringing us an MMO, because he's not. He's talking about making an offline version of the game and bringing that to the West. Suddenly, I'm really interested in Dragon Quest X. Because, you guys know, I talk about this a lot. I'm afraid of playing MMOs. I'm afraid that I've got the type of personality that's just going to get sucked into them, and I'll, realize 4 months later that I've completely abandoned, like, my YouTube channel or something like that. So, I'm really hoping that this is a possibility. This would be really awesome to see not only an offline version of Dragon Quest X coming to the West, coming to a console like maybe PlayStation 4 or Nintendo Switch, probably Nintendo Switch, let's be honest, is really appealing and a pretty exciting prospect for somebody like me. I know that a lot of people here probably do play MMOs and are able to play them responsibly and are probably a little bummed about the prospect of it being offline, but for somebody like me, wow. This sounds like a pretty cool idea. And also with the success of Dragon Quest XI, maybe they're trying to sort of think about ways to recapture that magic. And these are the things, the offline single player, the console experience that they're seeing and are thinking of trying to apply this to other games. And that also really excites me. Now we also have a little bit of controversy coming from Square Enix. Recently, The World Ends With You Final Remix was released for Nintendo Switch, and I haven't really heard too much about it. I haven't played any of it, but what I've heard that the controversy is this game was released in several other languages, including Italian, which it was not originally released on the original DS. Over time, fan translators have brought a translation of the game over to Italian players so that people in Italy can play with a fan translation. It wasn't the cleanest, it wasn't the best, but it was functional. And so far, this is all just really good news. Fan translations are awesome, new actual localizations are awesome, but where the controversy comes in is when actual localization teams that were outsourced by Square Enix use that fan translation, at least as a base for their translation. Now, I don't want to talk about any sort of legal aspects because this is a Japanese game company localizing something into Italy, whereas I'm an American. I have very little actual knowledge of legalese and other territories, so I won't even bother talking about the legality. But what we could talk about here is probably the morality. Fan translations are something that take a few people, a handful of people, sometimes larger people, numbers of people, but usually just a small team, several months for smaller projects and years for larger projects. And you can rest assured that an RPG is going to be one of those years in the making sort of projects. So what ended up happening is this company took on the job for Square Enix to localize the job into Italian using all of their resources, downloaded a localization or a fan translation ROM, which a couple of people spent years on making and then profited off of it. Now, I can't say anything about legally speaking because obviously I'm not Italian, but I can say morally speaking, this is absolutely reprehensible. And I surely hope that Square Enix finds out what exactly happened here, takes action against whoever they contracted to do this, and properly compensates the people who have been affected, because the game is out. There's no bringing that back in. Maybe they could release a patch with a new localization, but at this point, it's already published onto the cards, guys. This team needs to be compensated for, or at least thanked and credited properly for the release of this game in Italy. On the subject of this, Fan Translator Mewster wrote, "From what I could see, in the best case, my translation was used as the base for their work. In the worst case, they used it as is, correcting little mistakes and badly written parts." So it's almost like a verbatim translation. This seems to me like a pretty clear-cut case of real-world professional plagiarism, and that is awful. Absolutely morally reprehensible. Now, we didn't get a whole lot in the way of new game announcements or localization updates or any other sorts of little news like that, but what we did get was our first ever English or Western trailer for Etrian Odyssey X. We have received our first trailer for that, and it's looking pretty cool. Also, a little bit of rumor mill news. Corpse Party Blood Drive, which was originally released for the PlayStation Vita, has been rated by the ESRB for the Nintendo Switch. So that's really great. If hopefully maybe they can release that this October, probably not, but if they could, that'd make a really great Halloween game, I am sure. Also, Dragon Quest XI has received its first official patch since it was released. There's a first major update that has enabled higher frame rates on PC, which is something that a lot of people were a little upset about. And also, it resolved an issue with the censor that was in place on the game that would prevent people from entering in their actual names into the game. And now it's time for a quick recap in last week from SuperDerek. Starting with Wednesday of last week, I released a video in which I was unboxing a mystery box from Japan that came from my dearest buddy, Jimmy Hoppa, who just loaded that thing up with snacks and games and merch and just all sorts of crazy, amazing stuff that you can only really get in Japan. And last week on Friday, I finally released my thoughts on Dragon Quest XI. After 50 hours of playing through the beginning of the game, I finally was able to give you my first thoughts on whether or not I think this game is worth your time. And if you want to know what I think about Dragon Quest XI so far, definitely go check it out. Keep in mind, these are just my impressions. It's not a full-on review. That will be coming up probably later on down the line for sure, because it's a very long game. But that's something that can hold you over until next week's this week's Octopath Traveler review, so keep your eyes out for that this week. Now, we do have some community news this week, talking about a fan translation that was just released for Tenchi no Uta. This was a Super Nintendo or Super Famicom RPG that we never got in the West, but it was comprised, the developers of this game were comprised of a lot of members that would go on to form Team Wolf of Tales of fame. I think they also worked on Star Ocean, so you guys should probably check this game out. It's supposed to be a pretty standard turn-based RPG with the ability to converse with monsters and stuff instead, so kind of got that slight Shin Megami Tensei sort of feel to it. This fan translation was put together by Translation Corporation. As we already talked about, this is a huge endeavor for anybody to embark on, and most of these never come to fruition. So I'd like to send a huge congratulations to Translation Corporation, and thank you all so much for your hard work in making this translation. This is going to be really great. Now, moving on to new releases that are coming out this week, we've got Valkyria Chronicles. The original is getting a port over to Nintendo Switch from PlayStation 3. So if you were a fan of Valkyria Chronicles 4 that was recently released, this is going to be something that you will definitely want to check out. Also coming to Nintendo Switch is finally the HD remaster of Dark Souls. Dark Souls Remastered was released on other consoles, but it was delayed for Nintendo Switch because they were trying to make it run a little bit smoother, a little bit better. Let's hope that they were able to pull that off. We'll see later on this week, I guess. Speaking of Dark Souls, the Dark Souls trilogy is going to be making its way out onto PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and this is going to be great. It's going to contain Dark Souls HD Remastered, Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3, making it, a trilogy. Also coming out on PlayStation 4 this week is Resonance of Fate HD. This is an HD port of an earlier game, so if you are a fan of Resonance of Fate, you should definitely check this one out. And then lastly, we've got an indie-developed Souls-like, very much inspired by Dark Souls based on what I could see. This is called Sinner: Sacrifice for Redemption, and this is coming out on PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, PC, and even Xbox One is getting this one. So that's really great, especially if all this news of Dark Souls has gotten you interested. Well, here's one more Souls-like that looks like it could be interesting. Anyway, I'd also like to send a huge thank you to The Abyss for allowing me to use his music all video long. This was a fantastic album that I'm drawing from. This is an album that is coming out at the end of the month on October 30th, so if you're a fan of his work so far, you should definitely check him out in the links in the video description, as well as just keep your ears open, because later on this month, at the end of the month, I will be giving away some free download codes for his album. Anyways, guys, I am SuperDerek. This is the JRPG News. I will see you guys next time, and take care, everyone.